Hello and welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, we're looking at strikers for Arsenal. Benjamin Sesko, Victor Osimhen. Can anyone reboot the Gunners season? Then we take a look at Erling Haaland's enormous new deal at Manchester City. What does this mean for the future of football contracts? We look at a player who's joining Crystal Palace from the Championship, and we take a tour around the Premier League's results. That's all on today's episode of the Transfer Flow podcast. So we are back for another Monday roundup of transfers, of games. I'm joined by Ted Knutson. How are you doing, Ted?
Good. I'm thawed out after my venture into West London on the weekend.
Mm-hmm. You weren't, the cockles of your heart weren't warmed by Darwin Núñez scoring a brace?
They would have been if I hadn't had a bet on Brentford plus 1.25. Like, I actually really liked Darwin, and I was excited when he came on. And then I told my son, we were about 20 rows back behind Liverpool's goal at that half. And I told my son, like, watch your head because, Darwin's on. So we might have shots coming in our direction. And we did have a shot come in our direction. And then in the 91st and 92nd minute, there were two shots that were hammered into the goal. And thus Liverpool won 2-0.
Yeah, that was funny because I knew that you had a bet going the other way in that game, and I looked on like the FOTMob app at half time, and I saw Liverpool had 19 shots, and I was like, I don't think Ted is going to win that bet.
I didn't think I was going to win it either, although that was all at the other end, and so like I couldn't tell how good or bad most of those chances were. And then I was like, ooh, might have gotten away with this one. I didn't feel like Salah had a great game. But yeah, anyway, I think we're supposed to talk about strikers that are not Darwin Núñez, who I thought would have been a good target to escape Liverpool and go to Arsenal in the summertime, but it didn't happen.
Well, I still think that he probably is going to be available. And in some ways, I guess the guys who we're going to talk about have some similar properties to him in that there are a couple of names who've been linked to Arsenal. So there's Benjamin Sesko, who was linked to Arsenal very heavily in the summer. It looked like Arsenal were actually trying to do that deal. He decided to stay at least another year at Leipzig. He's got a release clause that's open this summer. And Victor Osimhen, who there's also talk about. Now, he's obviously on loan at Galatasaray. To get him would probably be significantly difficult. There'd be some kind of break clause, blah, blah, blah. But these guys are... they're runners. They're guys who want to run into space more than the kind of striker you might have expected Arsenal to target, I guess.
So I think that one of the things that Arsenal are missing right now is a lot of pace up front. And it's the one thing that Martinelli regularly provides to them out when he's wide. People have been frustrated about Martinelli. He had a goal this weekend that was a funky one. It wasn't sort of like a traditional one. Finished it up very close. Ended up going in, I think it was off the keeper, right?
Yeah, it was a bit of pinball.
Yeah. Looking at the profile and sort of what they want versus what they might get, like Marmoush actually would have been the tops of that profile. The issue for Arsenal is like they're very careful about their age profile, and most teams are now. So if you're not getting a younger age profile, sort of age 22, maybe age 23, some of this aging into what is typically the peak of players up front, which is sort of that 24 to 26 range in there. Sometimes they last a little bit longer than that, but what they don't want to do is they don't want to pay a 5-year, 6-year contract. Who knows? Not 9 years. 5-year, 6-year contract for somebody that's 26 and is only going to decline the entire time. Like, you don't want to pay a top end transfer fee and contract for somebody like that. And that's usually how football has worked out. People have complained occasionally in the past that, footballers are not done, dead and buried by the age of 30. Look, if you're running your team properly, you need to be very aware of things called age curves. And you need to be very conscious of not paying top tier wages to somebody whose performance is likely declining for the entirety of the contract you're buying them for. So they try and buy pretty young. And that used to be a thing that looked weird because like only the smart teams did it. And then everybody else caught up, at least in England, and they're like, oh, yeah, we want that too. Can't imagine where they learned that from. But from Arsenal's perspective, like Jesus obviously is out for potentially an entire year. Havertz is partly a center forward, but has flexibility. But he's not like the ideal person to lead the line, and particularly not the ideal person to run in behind. They have people like an Odegaard, presumably another midfielders that they'll sign in the summertime will also be able to play sort of these deeper balls that relieve space, especially as defenses get congested, right? So if you've got players in your midfield, potentially also in your back line, that can create these longer passes to free up space, get teams almost immediately into that final third, that's awesome, but you need somebody to run onto it. So the Cole Palmer, Nico Jackson combination that's been done so well for Chelsea so far this season, they would love to recreate something like that. They need somebody that has some pace, but also has a willingness to run and sort of is a little bit that style. The other thing they're looking for is like shot volume. Can they regularly get shots in good areas? Like usually that's a pretty stable thing that happens for center forwards. Sometimes it depends on which team they're on. If their team's terrible, it's fine. But that's a third element that they're kind of or second or third element they're looking for. And then you finally would like to have somebody that has their head up and can create for other people. But I think that that's like a nice to have and not a mandatory at that point.
Okay, so the guys who we were going to talk about here, each of them kind of tick some of the boxes, but not others. So Osimhen is just 26. He just turned 26. So as you say, this is a guy who is coming in presumably at the peak of his abilities, which is what makes it so insane that he's spending this year at Galatasaray. On the other hand, he's doing exactly what you'd want him to be doing at Galatasaray. He's absolutely dominating the league. He's getting over 5 shots a game, and he's historically been a very high shot volume player, right? 4 shots per 90 in top leagues. XG very solid as well. The problem is, of course, that when you're saying, if you were signing a 26-year-old and you said maybe we get like 3 good years out of them, a good year for Osimhen is kind of like 22 90s or something like that.
Injury history is another one. Obviously, Arsenal are very injured this year, so they would like to have guys with clean injury history. And if not, they want to have players that are like elite. You can even find like sort of stopgaps to be able to fill these slots, right? So say Lewandowski, right? Lewandowski doesn't fit any of that profile, but you could have gotten him basically for, pretty good wages at Barcelona. He was happy to play for another really good team. As long as you're kind of like, bridging that gap with some player that has the technical skills and abilities and isn't dead. His legs aren't completely dead. Like you can still sort of build around that. Osimhen's worry was twofold. One, Napoli were completely insane about the price they wanted everybody to pay in the summertime. Like they burned every bridge to the ground. They're like, oh, we demand 100 million. And everyone's like, that's insane. And then we demand 80 billion. And like, I'm still not doing that. And they're like, we demand 60 billion. And he had been told that he was going to get to leave to go to his next place. Like that, these things are usually pretty cleanly communicated. Basically, everybody got stuck in the mud, and it was an idiotic negotiation process and sales process from Napoli's side. And then they got in a budget deficit where they needed to do some things. They then loaned him out to Galatasaray, and then they sold Kvara in just this week in the break to PSG for a large number. He got a very nice raise, but yeah, it was a case where like now he's coming back. Like, what do you do with him? Now the issue for top tier teams that are smart is that you look at his performances over the course of the 3 years, and you kind of have to take Turkey out because it's not a very high quality league. It's easy for older players to put up good numbers in Turkey. And you're like, I have real concerns about his trending. If he's already trending lower, and you know that he's been doing that since his age like 24 season, like, all right, this is a problem because we're only picking up like 27 to 31. Like that's not a good deal for us. So the only people that are jumping for Osimhen are ones that are willing to take that on. But given the prices that Napoli has been asking, that makes no sense for almost anybody in England that has a smart background.
Where do you think the kind of biting point is on price then? Because in the summer, it did kind of feel like when we were getting down to the 50-60 range, I don't know, I was quite surprised that nobody went in at that level. That felt like a kind of reasonable level given what his production's been.
I think by that point, there wasn't any more flexibility in almost any of the teams to make that deal. Also, the other side of the question is how much money is he asking for? So you're looking at 50 million plus another 50 in wages, 60 in wages. Like, how much is he looking for? Like 300,000 a week is a good chunk. And if you're pretty sure that you can't move him late in his career, then you're like, ooh, I don't want that at all. So now this next time around, you're probably looking at 40 is the range that he might be around. And then his wage package goes down substantially too. You're like, yeah, we'll do 200 with bonuses plus uh, a friendly team clause that can extend you. Like that
Hmm.
might be the case that you look at to be able to get that deal done. Everybody looks at it and they get stuck in price world of what it was 2 years ago. But like we've been talking about in this podcast, and like Gabriel Marcotti had a great article, I think last week at ESPN, like the market is going to come down and players and their agents have to get really familiar with that real quick. Cause otherwise you'll be sitting out there on an island and being like, well, nobody's going to pay our wages. This sucks. We're just going to keep going. The reality is everything is changing on you. And if you don't catch the market move, you're going to be left behind.
Hmm. Hmm. So obviously that's something that agents are going to have to be alive to and start, counseling their players on over the next couple of years. But to go back to something you said before about his trending kind of being negative since he was 24, what are you looking at here? What are the kind of flags that stand out to you?
Part of it is shot generation. Part of it is expected goals. Like, are they still getting good quality shots when they get them? Um, Sometimes the team that they're in is weird, and you have to like make a make a judgment to just say, oh yeah, that was an outlier season because the team was bad and they didn't have the creative players or something like that. Maybe their coach was strange. I don't know. There's lots of reasons why, and this is why this is as much art and science. This is why when they say the AI is going to take over scouting, I'm like, yeah, okay, for like one position, maybe. Like it's almost impossible for AI to be able to put everything together. And this is as somebody who's been around some of the best models in the world, some of the best modelers in the world, also had background in the gambling side to be able to see all this at once. I think there's still a space for elite talent evaluators to sort of have a lot of say on these player transfers. So when you're looking at that type of stuff, you're like, okay, then the price comes in. And it's always a balance between like performance and like how certain you are that this performance is maintainable or potentially increasable in the future, and then how much are we having to pay in order to have the opportunity for that.
Okay. Okay. So then should we look at somebody who's kind of significantly earlier in his career, still pre-peak, Benjamin Sesko? He's 21 still. I think he's an absolutely insane specimen, right? Like this is a guy who's 6'5", who's fast, who's 2-footed, and who can dribble as well. I mean, like that is the thing that's really interesting when you look at his numbers, right? This is a guy who dribbles at very high volume for a centre forward. If you see him as a centre forward, obviously he's playing in Germany and he's playing for Leipzig, where you're not facing a kind of like low block defense in the way that you might be for a top team. What do you think of Sheshko?
I loved him as an idea in the summertime. I had heard that he does not have a release clause, but you
Not
never
this
know. Like,
window, I don't think.
yeah, not even this window, but I'd heard that his re-up did not necessarily
Okay.
contain one. It might have had like, a quiet agreement that if the right deal came in, they would be able to move him. And Leipzig are struggling this year, so like they might be happy to sell and revamp and rejig. So it's not impossible. We showed some shot maps last week, and we're not going to bring them up this week because it's not part of our prep. But one of the things you love center forwards to have on their shot maps are those lovely little triangles. We love a
Mm,
triangle, and a triangle means that they're getting to run on the through balls, so passes from the midfield that bypass that last line of defense, for them to be able to get chances against the goalkeeper. Usually, that means that they're making pretty smart, intelligent runs, so that they're also aware of being able to do that and where they need to sit on the back line. And also, it usually means they've got some decent pace to be able to beat a lot of defenders. Now, Germany is a slightly complicated league because it is a bit more transitional, a bit less deeper block. But if you're seeing like those in Spain happen, or in Italy, if you're getting regular sort of triangles in Italy, like against those sort of deeper middle blocks, like those are good signs.
mm.
Sheshko has those. And that's another thing that you like. He's also quite used to playing in a pressing system, which is another thing. Like if you've been taught from an early age what your cover shadow looks like and where you're checking on your shoulders and making sure that like you're trying to lock down players, you're basically going to help teams get those almost free goals that we've seen even coming into this weekend. I think we saw Bournemouth get one or two. Might have
Mm.
been Forest that got an easy goal where somebody's trying to pass out of the back with their goalkeeper, and then they make a pass that's just like a little bit loose, and then bam, you pounce on it. You've knocked down a one or two extra passing angles because of your press, and then you're right back on goal. That's a really useful skill set for players to have, and it's one that Sheshko definitely has because he's played in the Red Bull system for a while.
Hmm. So he's since he's moved to Germany been significantly lower shot volume No, right. He's kind of like 2.5 a game. This season taking a little step back with his expected goals, though also Leipzig, I don't really know what's going on there, but it's like, the bloom is off the rosa, I guess. But how much would those worry you if you were looking at this player?
I have some minor concerns, but given his age and given the struggles of the team, like you can kind of write a lot of that off. Like your scouting from last year is probably the thing that's sort of predominant still. So I think that he's like a fine target if he's still available in the summertime for that sort of reasonable wage, then or reasonable fee, then that's something that you could see Arsenal do. I think that there are not a lot of great center forwards running around. I think that I don't want to say we're in like a trough necessarily, but I think you need to be a little creative in where you're looking in order to find the really good ones.
Well, I suppose kind of like Chelsea with Nico Jackson, who was not a who was kind of an inside forward, I guess, when they brought him in. It's an interesting one. One thing before we move on from this subject, I guess, to play devil's advocate, some Arsenal fans and I guess some football fans generally would say, if you consistently target these younger players, these pre-peak players, do you run the risk of never kind of like fully peaking as a team altogether? Is there an argument to be made for Arsenal, a team like Arsenal, who are on the edge of major honours, for them to target a slightly older player who is already peak?
If you love them, like if you think that they are really, so I was really happy for them to go after Kimmich this summer, right?
Okay.
I thought Kimmich was like a fantastic archetype. He's used to playing in a Pep type system. He can play those awesome passes from deep, while also still being able to defend quite well. He's played most of his career either as a fullback or a defensive midfielder, and so he kind of has flexibility across roles as well. It's a little bit of what Partey's doing, but with a guy that is in the top 1% of worldwide passers, as
Hmm.
opposed to a guy that is okay and then physically gassed consistently. So there are times where you're like, yes, I will happily do that deal, even if the wages are a little high, as long as we make sure that the expenditure isn't too much and our total exposure isn't too much, and they have skills that continue to sort of have value and a relatively low fall off. Passing skill actually is one of those intellectual skills that
Mm,
maintains quite well. Like
yeah.
as long as you can strike a ball pretty well as a footballer, you're going to be okay at it. Now, getting into the positions to consistently make those passes, get the right angles, those types of things, it's still quite a mental thing. But it's actually like one of those funky calculus elements of football where if you looked at it, just take a player and attach him to all of his potential different passes and like move them around, and you realize like how much even just like a few meters either way significantly impacts your ability to play that game. That doesn't mean that you need to have like a really great amount of pace or anything like that. It just means that they need to still be aware enough and head up enough to be able to do that. So those types of players are pretty useful, but you have to be really careful about older players up front. The deal just has to make sense, or you have to already be okay with it, and it's an additive one where you're like, look, we have a pretty good
Hmm.
squad, we just want to add an extra piece, even if this one isn't perfect for us, like, and it could have a really big upside. That's okay, because like it's not going to hurt us that much.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. I guess it's one of those situations as well where having a club where the coach is talking to the analytics guys, is talking to the sporting director, where everybody's kind of like simpatico. You kind of need to be there if there needs to be a really clear plan for how you're going to use a player like that if they aren't adding a lot going forward.
And people just have to realize that there is only one pot of money. And very, very rarely are owners going to sanction money above and beyond what sort of the medium term budget actually is. And so any move that you make right now sacrifices a future move unless you're able to sort of flip them for an additional amount of money in the future, which is always a bit uncertain.
Well, let's move on from this to somebody whose future is not uncertain. Now, Erling Haaland has signed up for another 9.5 years, I think, at Manchester City. This is going to take him up to 2034. And as Grace Robertson said on Twitter, don't look up how old you will be when this contract ends. But this commits Haaland to pretty much his entire career at Manchester City. And from his point of view, it's maybe it means that he can't negotiate a contract, in a couple of years when he's like really flying, you assume, but the tail end of that should be super lucrative for him, right? He's going to be getting paid crazy money when he's 34, 35. So a great deal for Haaland, you've got to say.
Do you think so? Do you like this?
I would like it if I were Haaland or Haaland's money manager or Haaland's agent. Yeah, I mean it's pretty punchy from City because, well, the whole thing at the moment with City is very punchy. Like they are behaving as if they do not have the outcome of this court case hanging over them, which is interesting.
So let's do City's perspective first, and then I'll fill you in on my take on the player perspective. So City's perspective right now is they have the best center forward in the world, or one of the two best. Like, let's say Mbappe is there too, right? What Mbappe's best position is actually a pretty big argument.
As he's a center forward.
Yeah, and so they have like one of the three best forwards in the world, and they've locked him up forever. And they're coming into this kind of like uncertainty period, or they were in this window where they've had their first significant fall off in performance. And God knows how long. It's been ages since we saw City actually struggle down below the Champions League positions, almost regardless of which head coach they've had. So what they've done is they knew that they were coming into a recruitment period where they need to reload the whole cupboard. And they've got to change out a bunch of older cogs. De Bruyne has been fairly strongly rumored to go to the US and play in MLS. Probably coming up this summer. Like that was a last summer thing. Largely, he said that he didn't necessarily want to go to Saudi. So that looks like it's going to be reality. So they've got a lot of turnover coming. And what they've done is they've locked in a cornerstone that says that we have one of the three best forwards in the world forever. And if you want to come play with us, we still got Pep. And we got one of the best center forwards, and we got a pretty good squad, really. Come lock in with us and help rebuild the next sort of legacy, dynasty, however you want to call it, right? In the best, highest paid league in the world. They also, now, what's interesting is like, this is a very long deal, and PSR loophole has been closed. Thank you, Chelsea. So that you can't amortize the PSR element of a contract across like 8 years like they were doing. It's been locked into 5. But City have a huge, huge gap between them and any sort of like significant risk of them falling afoul of PSR issues. And so if you know that, and you know that things might change in the future, you're like, look, we can actually take this hit right now. Like we can lock him in, and we now are able to recruit from a perspective of having a great player aboard. We have a great coach aboard. It doesn't really impact us financially from a perspective of, cost too much. So we're not too worried about that. Like this is all fine. Let's get it done now. So that's my perspective on the City side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perspective on the player side. So what is the most important thing a player, what are the two great goals that players have, elite players especially, in their careers?
I guess financial security.
They want to earn as much money as possible, and they want to win trophies. Those are sort of like the most basic ones. Now, you can earn as much money possible in a couple of different ways. If you're coming to the end of a contract, you can then do what Mbappe did, and you get a massive signing bonus that's basically your whole transfer fee. And then you get like great wages on top of it, right? Now, the other way to do that, though, is you can put that on the back end. So basically, you take that signing fee, and then all those years that you would have declining performance and declining amounts of money, if you locked in top of market money, so say that you're making 300,000 right now a week. Like this is a ballpark number. It could be more, it could be less. I don't know what the clauses look like, the incentives. But say it's 300,000 a week, and you lock that in for 9 years. Now, the reality is, for the first 5 years of that contract, you might have been able to get that for Haaland. But then those last 4 should have been something like, 150, 100,000-ish, especially in a space where we know that the economics look like they're going to go down a bit in other places. If you lock in top of market money when you're one of the best players in the world and you keep that for a really long time, and you know that the gradual pie should be decreasing, that's a really good deal. And it's a different way of doing that signing bonus than you would get otherwise. So even if you didn't have like crazy leverage at the moment, you still are able to get paid a lot in the future. Whether he actually has some sort of agreements on release clauses is an open question, but I think that it's a possibility that nobody wants communicated. And the two Manchester clubs in particular are very, very bad about telling the truth in all the clauses and the deals that they sign, and or about anything, honestly. City feels like it's filtered through about 1,000 lawyers every single time. And like whether those lawyers are strictly telling the truth or just exaggerating the things that they want you to know is an open question.
Yeah, I mean, Der Spiegel will let us know in about 15 years' time. But from City's point of view as well, I guess, we would say, well, what this could do is in 5-6 years' time, this could significantly decrease their ability to be competitive if this is an enormous portion of wages going out. But at that point, do we just assume that maybe Haaland goes off to a retirement home at another City Football Group club?
That's entirely possible. It could be that, City just let him go for no transfer fee at some point and somebody picks that up. There are lots of ways to shift this along. And I don't think that they're scared of it too much because, if they also know who he is, right? And this is a player that has deep intrinsic motivation. Right? Mm-hmm. This is a player that like is challenging himself consistently, and his own metrics and his own goals are what got him here. And people lose this, right? But like they know a lot about what this guy looks like Mo Salah, like Cristiano Ronaldo, like Messi, like in different ways, right? So like a lot of them have these unbelievable work ethics. They're just so crazily focused, and they don't let them slip at any point. And if you're that type of player, then you're like, yeah, I think he's gonna, unless there's like a catastrophic injury, I think he's gonna have a very, very good long-term career as how he goes, as opposed to some of the other ones where they're just keeping it together, and they've had party elements, and they have outside influences, and you're like, that guy is not a great 9-year bet. And so they're able to have pretty good information about how that works.
Mm-hmm. Interesting one. Well, it's an insane contract. I'm annoyed.
How happy would Barcelona be if they had locked Lionel Messi up for a decade ago, and then like not had to worry about all that stuff? If it had just gotten through all the PSR nonsense, you're like, yep, we got Messi for ages. We paid him up front so that he's on a reasonable contract forever. US teams do this all the time. They also do the flip side where like you have like really disgusting end of contract sort of cliffhangers, and then they kill themselves. But that's different. Like let's ignore that.
Well, my worry is that Barcelona do something like that now, because they're due a bunch of re-ups on some of their young talents, and the Barcelona way is we will deal with this problem later. But there's only so many cans you can kick down the road before you run into, a fucking wall of cans. Okay, edit point. Let's move on.
A wall of cans, like a trip up to Newcastle on the train with Arsenal fans. Wall of cans. There you go.
Okay. Well, shall we move on to a couple more players?
Did you see the Fulham thing this weekend, where basically someone took a photo of Fulham on their away day, and they had they had a photo of them with like a bunch of oysters out and a bottle of Veuve on the train. Like, I really appreciated that. I was like, oh, I would go along with that. And then people were like, oh, look at these idiotic Fulham fans. I was like, man, people are just having fun. I love when people are having fun with this stupid sport, because so often people are miserable. Don't be miserable. Just enjoy all the fucking things. Like, that's some scran right there. Like, we appreciate everybody's scran. Like, train scran is a real thing. Do you drink beer?
I'm not a huge beer guy. I drink Guinness.
What is the worst beer or other drink that you would drink on a train, like train beer, like, because it has a different caliber, like I have a pretty high standard at home, but if I'm stuck traveling on a train, like, or a plane, but usually trains have better choices because you can grab it from the station.
I don't know, man. Like, train is kind of like instant hangover, like kind of come down situation. So it's got to be really, really good.
Wow, that's really interesting. Like, you've got a very high level. See, I once had a Carlsberg on a train. It was a warm Carlsberg, and I regretted that one forever. In fact, I regret it now. So like, Carlsberg is clearly below my level. I've had a couple of Heinekens on a plane because that was all that was available. Yeah. Again, like, those were mistakes. I don't need to make those mistakes anymore. But I feel like, certain times you're very, very happy for the quality of train beer. I'd be fucking delighted for a bottle of Veuve. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. But like, I actually know a guy, a French guy whose family, like, work in Champagne, and he only drinks champagne. It's the only alcoholic drink he drinks, and I've got to say that is an attitude that I would like to I would like to bring into my own life in the way that Fulham fans clearly have.
Man's got to have a code. And
it makes me want to be a Fulham fan.
Champagne only. Ooh. Have there been
on.
complaints about that atmosphere recently where it's just like, yeah, too many people have drunk champagne and oysters. They're too quiet. So someone's like, could you cheer once in a while?
Just people projectile vomiting at the back of the stadium. Okay, right. Let's move on to Romain Esse, because I know that people specifically wanted to hear your perspective on this deal. He's 19 years old. He's joined Crystal Palace for a reported fee of around 14 to 15 mil, including add-ons, something like that. Palace, of course, this is seeing comparisons with Michael Olise, who they picked up also from the Championship, also at a very young age. Esse is a left footer. He plays on the right. He could play attacking midfield. He played for Millwall. He's already performing in the Championship. He's 19. This seems like this is a very Palacey thing to do.
They have a profile that they have had great deals of success with, which is that they love a ball mover in the Championship that can keep their head up, that has good pace, likes to sort of run with the ball, and is young. And honestly, at this point, like, it's worked out so well for them so many different times. I feel like let them continue until it starts to fail. Honestly, also, like, a 19-year-old playing in the Championship and playing pretty well, like the Millwall team wasn't bad. Like, I like this. I don't know if I love this, but I like this. Like, it comes back to like what the fee was. But anytime you're picking up a younger player, like sort of under 20 out of the Championship that's getting real minutes and doesn't look out of place, like, that's probably a pretty good bet for the future, especially if you're a left footer.
Yeah, true. Like, it's such a hugely valuable position, and he's so young that, like, I don't know, he's not anywhere near the finished product, right? You look at his underlying numbers in expected goals and assists, and it's lower than you'd like. It's like kind of 0.3, though I guess Olise was actually around that when they bought him. But it's all the other stuff here, right? So for example, he's creating quite a lot in expected assists and decent progressive passing and dribbles in quite high volume on a team that are super low possession. They're the lowest possession team in the league, right? And he's defending as well. He's defending pretty hard.
And those are also things that also tend to improve as you, one, get with a team that has better talent, but two, like, you just get a bit older. I think it's a good deal, and it's a very, very Palace-like deal. Like, if you had to pick the whole of the Premier League, that's who's most likely to make this deal, is definitely Palace. It's like, who's most likely to buy a very talented technical player from the Championship, then probably slightly overpay for them. It's a good question, right? But I was feeling like it's Spurs, and mostly because I was feeling bad about Archie Gray this weekend. I was at the match with somebody who loves Archie Gray and pays a lot of attention to Leeds, and they're very sad to see him go. And then obviously he's been put in completely out of position. Had an own goal this weekend, like off of a deflection, and it's just like, just experiencing horrible Groundhog Day over and over. When he could be part of one of the best Championship sides that we've ever seen in Leeds. Instead, he's with Spurs right now.
I mean, he could also just be a TikTok star. That's what he looks like. Every time I see Archie Gray, I'm like, this is like a little boy from TikTok. He does not look like a professional footballer to me. It's just
Isn't
the
he
hair.
like 6'2"?
I don't care. I can't take the hair seriously. It's just like we at some point we're going to have like a prime minister with that haircut, and I just can't live with that.
Like Canada.
Yeah, exactly, like Canada. Do you think that Palace get enough credit for the way that they reinvented their recruitment? Because about 5 years ago, I remember every season with Palace, I was like, they have a really old squad of guys who are overpaid, and relegation is coming unless they address this. And over the last few years, the team has got younger and a lot more talented and a lot more athletic. They seem to have got smarter.
They really changed and they got smarter. And like, I don't know. I mean, certainly we should give them credit for the current bit. Like, I feel like we need to still be correct in that they got a little bit lucky in like the Hodgson years where basically they had a team that something had like an average weighted minutes of 31. And they got older and they barely made any moves and managed to sort of like squeak through in the 15th to 17th range. But no, they not only got smarter, they got a lot more interesting and aggressive in head coach hires as well. Like Vieira, I think, was the first part of that. I would not have made that hire because I don't quite like how he teaches build-up play. Feels like he's like dogmatic to the point of insanity, but also not able to communicate the important bits to players as to like what they need to do and build up. But Glasner, I think, is a potential like future top coach, and so they got him at the right time. They're allowing him to play his style. They're allowing him to have like some breathing room as well, which I think is pretty important. And yeah, they're aware and interested in giving weapons, and they're very willing to work the championship, work League One, buy players early, and then help them continue to develop, which I think is underrated. England has. It's not quite Spain, but it is probably slightly better than France outside of a couple of spots where like they just have really, really good development culture now. And it's not a thing that existed like up until Chelsea really started investing, City's really started investing. And then it didn't exist broadly. Like there was a period where Arsenal's academy was not very good. And Spurs academy was like fine. You'd get like once in a while. Now, like even their cast-offs are going and playing in real leagues and getting like, good minutes and potentially coming back here after they've had like a lot of playing time. So I think Palace underrated in how they're developing players. And they certainly did change a few years ago, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Tompkins era, I remember being very, very bleak. They were always on my list of teams who could get relegated this year, and I kind of wanted them to because, like, back then you would hear a lot of old school pundits who'd say, "Oh, the X player has still got plenty to offer," and Palace would pick them up on a free or for a small fee, and gradually they were stacking up these guys who are earning close to 100K a week and who were all crap to middling.
They're still playing IUs though, so I'm confused.
Yeah, that is weird. But yeah, actually, when you were talking about people picking up like kind of half decent technical players from the Premier League, Leicester love to do this.
The IUs are like Ant or Deck to me. You know how like Bill Nye refers to them as Ant or Deck because he can't remember like which one's which. Like my brain just like I don't even know. Like they're just the IUs anymore.
Maybe they'll have kids at some point and we'll just like have an IU in the league forever.
I like it.
Okay. So we've got a little bit of time left. Would you like to talk about anything from the Premier League this weekend, or would you like to talk about Rayan Cherki, who we mentioned off air, and using some less balanced language than we normally try and use on the podcast? Should we talk a little bit about him because it sounds like he's got an agreement that he can leave Lyon for a very reasonable fee.
Lyon need to sell.
Yeah,
they are in deep trouble. The Textor group, at least on their football side, is that was a very, very well-run football club for a long time, and that seems to have stopped happening so much as it used to. So yes, Cherki was supposed to leave in summertime, did not. There are public texts of the owner of Lyon talking about moving him. I believe he's referred to as an asshole in those texts.
I think he calls him a little asshole.
Yes,
like
exactly.
That.
He's a very talented little asshole. Not my words, but Textor's. I would agree with like being very talented. I don't have any true insight as to his mentality, but I think that opinion of Textor is possibly fairly wide held across most of French football. So it wouldn't be unique in this case.
Well, and whenever you look at a player like this who does have all the talent in the world, who is very two-footed, who's an excellent dribbler, who's a really good creative passer at a very young age, who's put up real minutes, and who is highly rated at a club where, for all their other faults, they've been very, very good at noticing and promoting young talent. When that guy doesn't move on to a bigger club, you do sort of think it's kind of the Adrien Rabiot situation, right? Where you look at him and you are, wow, this guy's so talented. Why hasn't he had the career that he should have had? Oh, it's because he's a dick. Though with Rabiot, I think it was also like a family affair that he was kind of a dick. So, but this makes it really hard to find a landing spot for Cherki, right? As we were saying off the air, there are loads of coaches who are going to say, you need to be you need to be magical for me to put up with this. And there are other clubs where throwing him into the dressing room, the kind of club who'd be desperate enough to go and get him mid-season are also the kind of club that he would be uniquely poorly suited to because of all the baggage he might bring.
I'm trying to cleanse my brain of the question of like, what do you call a family of dicks, but also where mom is sort of the primary dick. And I'm just trying to get rid of that part from your earlier question. It was
a bit of a Team America kind of question.
Ooh, that's a great movie. If you haven't seen that, kids, Team America, puppets and the people who created South Park. Outstanding. Back to the question at hand. So if you could just have a focused version of like a Cesc Fabregas or a Mesut Ozil that was able to pass like that and be locked in, and also potentially dribble a little bit better than Cesc, or maybe after the injuries, like you'd be so excited. Like as a fan, this is the type of thing that you weep for. Like you want those types of creative passers. They are so important and valuable, and they create these moments that are truly exceptional. Cherki's that dude, and he's been that way for a really long time. And the mentality thing is a real thing, though. So a little bit like the Chicago Bulls could take on Dennis Rodman and keep him in check and still allow him to go miss games because he got too drunk, hungover, stoned, whatever, in Vegas with Carmen Electra and 6 other women and possibly some men. I'm not saying that Cherki did that. This is a Dennis Rodman story. Also, if you've never seen the cartoon version of She Broke My Dick, which is a story told by Dennis Rodman in Dennis Rodman's voice, absolutely watch that. Don't do it around any kids, but it's worth your time as well. Back to Cherki. If you could have that type of team where they can keep those types of players locked in and focused, like a Real Madrid probably could, you have 1 or 2 of those guys and everybody else is a stone, like then you're in good shape. But if you bring that into a group of assholes, a bag of dicks, like you're just fuck it, it's done, right? And you're going to fire a coach, and then you're going to waste a bunch of money. Guys are going to leave because like either they don't like these guys or they're part of the problem. So yeah, you got to be really, really careful about team chemistry when looking at players like that. Now, is Cherki the type of player that you would be careful about that? Yes. However, he's also a slightly unusual position for England right now. Like there are other leagues that could absorb him. I think he'd be really fun to watch in Serie A. I think he'd be very interesting to watch in Spain. But I feel like sort of his position is just a little too tween at the moment. And maybe his physicality is a little too tween to fit naturally in one of the English sides, especially one that could adopt him and keep him on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, I think if a team like Napoli, for example, were like, we've lost Kvara, and we believe that like
Conte would kill him.
Yeah, or
with his own 2 bare hands.
Or
like they're going for Garnacho anyway.
Control him in some way. I don't know. You could imagine it. You can imagine it. Like I also just think that maybe to a guy who does think he's the shit, Napoli is the kind of place where you will be worshipped as a god if you are actually the shit.
But they'll also scare you enough to make you prove it first.
Yeah, there'll be guys outside his house making sure that he gets to training on time. Like I don't know, maybe that'll work for him. But yeah, I guess the lesson overall summed up there by something you so beautifully said, which is you've got to be careful when throwing a dick at a bunch of assholes. Okay, have we got time for anything else? Anything else from the weekend? I mean, to be honest with you, the weekend I was just like, I'm worried for Ange. Amarim's United are still crap. Iraola is amazing. Like it's kind of the same stuff.
I think my question outside of maybe Leicester is who is making the next head coach move and when? Because I feel like we've kind of cleansed ourselves of problematic head coaches. The Ange thing, like firing Ange doesn't feel like a very Tottenham thing to do right now, especially given the early season stuff and the explicability of it. Like Spurs fans are going to moan, like they're going to moan anyway. Arsenal fans are going to moan. Liverpool fans moan when I said that like they were a bit lucky to get all the wins earlier this season on Twitter. Like honestly, guys, you were like an 80th percentile team for a lot of the years. You just happen to rack up like wins and not get that unlucky. And I'm not saying that they're not good, but they're not the best team ever at sitting on leads, or they're not the best team ever at scoring like, goals early and then being awesome. They're not even good at set pieces. Like that's usually one of the extra ways that you build in to score goals early. But I think that Liverpool recently have decided that they are good enough defensively that they're going to step on the gas a bit more. And they've just been generating a ton of shots. And when you're generating 20 plus shots, almost regardless of what the opposition is, almost regardless of whether it's home or away, like you're going to win a lot of games, especially if you've got pretty good finishers. So, well, pretty good players generally. So I think this weekend in particular, like there's been a lot of things where like, oh, Arsenal could come back into it. And Arsenal's metrics have been awesome. They were really, really good. They were okay this weekend. But no, now that Liverpool have decided to step on the gas, like I think that the only thing missing from them is the set pieces stuff, which they actually need more in the knockout competitions than they do in the league. And the flip side of it is Arsenal kind of well and truly dead in terms of the league, dead in 2 cup competitions, need to get themselves a little bit of a breather. But the Champions League's still out there, and they're still a really good team. Like these cup competitions, they've been great in. So, let them recoup a little bit, get a little bit of health. There's a very interesting set of Champions League matches, which we will talk about on Wednesday. And I think we're going to try and maybe record this a little bit earlier so we can get a little bit on the Tuesday overlap potentially, and then get some Wednesday previews. We usually do the midweeks on Thursday, but sadly, since we lost Robbie, we might have to change that up.
No, we don't speak about him anymore.
No.
R.I.P. R.I.P.
He's dead to us.
Yeah, he's dead to us. Yeah, look, I think it makes sense for Liverpool to kind of really try and step on the gas right now and try and pull away, because when you look at their fullback zone and even their defensive midfield zone, it does feel, and the way they faded, I guess, last season, you do sort of think at some point they're going to get tired, or at some point some problems might open up. They've now just got such a lead, and they can continue to extend that lead. If they can do that while they've got good defensive health, then they can just do it and they can kind of coast in down the stretch. I think that would be a smart.
I was at that game and I was astounded by how good Virgil and Konate were. Like, honestly, like those guys should not be that big and move that well. It's just like incredible what beautiful athletes they are. And that's one thing that you pick up in person that you might miss a little bit in the games, because like, oh yeah, whatever, they're fine. Like people do not look like that at that size most of the time. So yeah, I think the Liverpool thing is sort of there. I think the race for the Champions League is really hot right now, and there are questions about what Bournemouth should actually be doing, since we think that England will get the 5 this year. Like, is there ever going to be a better chance for them to shoot for the Champions League? Will they even have Iraola next year as a possibility? I don't know. United don't look like they're making any useful moves in this window, so like that's going to be, just check out, United fans. As I said in the newsletter, go watch Barcelona for a bit. You'll feel comfortable because it's another terribly run super team, but you'll also have a bit of fun. Like, so at least cleanse your palate in that way. Newcastle, I kind of felt bad. I was like cautiously positive about this last sort of run. They had 9 games unbeaten. I was like, yeah, but it's a bit of a soft and squishy schedule. And they got very irritated at that, thinking that I wasn't giving them super credit. And I was like, no, it's just something to be aware of. They didn't like trounce Wolves, etc. And then Bournemouth just handled them at home too. And it wasn't like they were missing a bunch of guys. So it's just, these things happen. But also Kluivert's finishing was awesome. And then they couldn't get back in the game. Those things happen in football, except to Liverpool.
Sure. And I think that basically means that the league is probably done. Thankfully, as you say, there are lots of other interesting stories going around, and we will continue to cover some Champions League stories midweek. Make sure that you send in any questions that you want us to answer, or talk about any players that you're interested in as well. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on a podcast app, then leave us a 5-star review. Make sure you're signed up for the newsletter, and of course you might want to consider signing up for variance betting as well if that's something that interests you. We will catch you later in the week, and thank you very much for listening, watching, and for all your support. Bye-bye.
Do you know that I went out with an Arsenal fan for the first time ever while dating? First time.
Wow. How did that go?
It was great, actually. I had like one of the best dates I've had in ages. We could actually mention Thomas Partey's name and make a joke about how we were talking about a random Premier League footballer in their 30s.
I've dated a few Arsenal fans. Now I think about it.
Did they go well?
Yeah, actually. But like Jewish girls from North London, there's kind of my bread and butter. So it's like, So from that point of view, like it was like it correlated with a lot of other positive factors for me.
Last year, I was dating an incredibly attractive older graduate student in London from the US.
Mhm.
And she sends me a message, I think in like April, and she's like, there are people sort of crying in Shoreditch right now, and they're all men. Is there a football thing that happened? And I was like, are they Arsenal fans? She's like, yeah, I think they might have been. It's like, yeah. League's gone this year. Oh, okay. Good to know. I was like, that is very astute of you to pick up on. Well done, you. Is your wife, who has a book and an article in a paper that shall not be named this weekend, is she a football fan?
No.
Is that good or bad for you?
It's like neutral. Her interest in football, I think there was a brief period when she took her greatest interest in Arsenal when Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain was playing for them. She was a big Oxlade-Chamberlain fan. And somebody else as well. Who the fuck else did she like? There's somebody else that she thought was hot.
Nasri?
Believe it or not. No. And not Giroud either, really. But no.
Oh.
She's not a football fan. Like, she comes from that kind of like posh English thing where they're like, we don't really like any sports if they don't involve like horses or sliding down mountains.
Sure. Occasionally men with thick necks running into each other.
But that's the only one I was good at. As a thick-necked man, there were like two sports I was actually good at, and they were rugby and tennis.
So, like, dating an Arsenal fan, I feel like this is awesome, and you can sort of commiserate together, and maybe possibly have highs of the highs. But I feel like it can also never mention Olivier Giroud, because suddenly it's just like, yeah, you've just blown out like all of the things. Like, she's elsewhere, forget it. Like, you'll catch her next week when she stops like fantasizing about. I mean, it's not that I don't also fantasize about Giroud. So
about Giroud.
He's fucking hot, dude.
He's fucking overrated. Like, look, he's. I don't deny that. I don't deny that he's hot. I don't deny that he's hot. But like the way people talk about him, like he's like the fucking hottest man on earth. It's like he's like a very French type, which if you're into it, is fine. But to me, he's not like top tier.
He's a French type crossed with David. He's from
like,
Michelangelo. He takes his shirt off, and you're like, oh my god.
He's not up there with the real David though. As in Beckham? Yeah.
David Beckham has aged very well. I feel like Beckham actually got much hotter as he got older.
Yeah, definitely. Because also you don't hear him talk as much, which I think is really in his favor.
The only time that his voice has actually come out of his body and was useful was the most recent meme from his documentary with Posh, where he was asking her to be honest. It's like the only time where you're like, David.
Oh my god! See, I'm a big, like early to mid.
How much of this is going in the podcast?
All of it. Early to don't put it in and double it, Rishi. Like the early 2000s / mid 2000s Italian defender. So there was a period when you had Maldini next to Cannavaro in the Italian defense, and I was like,
Cannavaro is magnificent.
Unbelievable.
By the way, this is actually an entirely other podcast that Patrick has, where like they just comment on the hotness of footballers.
That is true. We've only done that a handful of times, I would say.
How many handfuls?
In Giroud's case, I actually do know. Like we've all seen that image.
We had an entire episode on double denim.
I defend double denim.
Put that up on the screen, by the way. Like, get a slice of the double denim photo in there. Everybody's got to see it for themselves. And then put it next to one of him with his shirt off. And then you'll understand. Like, he can look like that, but also.
Yeah, but look, Ralph Lauren would defend double denim were he here. And I assume he will be here one day. You know, like
that's actually
someone to replace Ravi.
That's one of the founders. So the Founders podcast by David Senra actually has an awesome Ralph Lauren episode.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, if you ever, he's got one about Coco Chanel and other people too. Like he's very interested in people that start their own businesses and then like these fashion icons. He's done really good episodes on, usually because partly there's like good biographies or about them as well. So
I think Ralph Lauren is cool as fuck. Like especially when he, you know that shirt that he wears all the time. Have you seen the green check shirt that he wears? Where he's like, I bought it in Kmart in the 60s. The coolest man on earth, honestly. But Coco Chanel. Look, my oldest daughter is called Coco, but
who doesn't love a fashion icon?
Yeah, that's the difficult bit. I was like, she's a fash icon. Okay,